Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. It's an honor to have your work exhibited here at the Table and Gallery, the Rainbow Hippocampus. Do you start off first as an artist, or were you fascinated with the brain before becoming an artist?
Well, I mean, I was a musician for my whole life, actually. That was really my main artistic output, starting from, I was 5 or 6. Piano lessons was in bands, played rock and jazz and world music, and like minored in ethnomusicology in college. And I started getting into graphic design when I was making album art for the albums I recorded in my 20s and 30s. But science was always sort of plan A career-wise, I guess. I studied molecular biology and genetics when I was in undergrad. Um, and then I guess the brain ended up being a broad enough subject that it was something I felt like I could invest a career in. It just is endlessly complex and fascinating. And there's so many facets by which you can study it. It's the absolute foundation of the human experience. Everyone's got one. Everyone can relate to it. There's really a lot to be said for it. So uh, that's kind of how I went in that direction, I guess. And then it was definitely not the plan to branch out into art professionally. It was always something that I did sort of on the nights and weekends. And, society at large is generally telling people, like, don't go into the arts. It's not a good idea. I'm sure that you've run into that sort of thing, entrepreneurially, starting a gallery and this sort of stuff as well. And it can be challenging, but it can also be extremely rewarding. So it was just sort of a culmination of my interests, I guess, over the years that to finally figure out how to fuse my artistic and scientific interests in something that I could spend all my time on as opposed to having to break up my career across 16 different things, which was
So
nice.
when you first did art, what was your medium of choice?
Well, I started the neuroscience art painting just simple paintings with ink and Schwen paper. It's like popularly known as rice paper. Um, but it was more in a traditional sumi-e ink painting style. Like you'd see like the Chinese, Japanese brushes, the long brushes with the different kind of qualities and stiffness of brush. Uh, and was not really getting the effect that I was looking for when I was trying to replicate the kind of spontaneity of the branching patterns of neurons, where one of the things that's so beautiful about natural systems is that even if they have aspects like symmetry to them, there's all these stochastic variables that are thrown into the mix. So you can have the same exact tree cloned, grown in 2 different places, and based on their environmental variables, their branching patterns will be different from one another. So because of that, when the brain is trying to paint something with that degree of randomness, it's pretty crappy at it. It's always wanting to make patterns out of things. So you find that when you're painting with a brush, if you're not completely focused on embracing that asymmetry and the randomness, that you just start making things with regular patterns to them. So in experimenting with the regular brush and ink painting over the years, I actually had a happy accident one time where a fly or something, like some bug was like crawling across the page that I was painting on, and I went to blow it off, and the ink splattering from my breath created exactly the patterns that I was looking for. So you have the ability to control how the ink splatters, yet you still have the sort of randomness of the natural process, which is wanting to make this branching like pattern that you see in many different aspects of natural systems. So it was kind of a happy moment when I realized that I could, kind of perfect this technique and use it to create that give these images of neurons the life that I was unable to do so with the brush and paper.
Oh, wow. So do you feel that the brain transforms when it's in that creative element, when it's creating? And how so from a neuroscience perspective?
I think that the brain, it depends on what mode you're in. For me personally, I mean, I can speak for myself, I guess, most easily. Um, I have you have your brainstorming moments, where you are open to ideas, you're open to mistakes, you're open to risk, you are kind of planning the big picture. where you're sort of taking in ideas, you're synthesizing ideas. It's very much kind of integrating your knowledge base and the environment within yourself. And then you have the days where you are executing those things. So for me, I have very distinct days. A lot of artists don't. A lot of artists, I think, integrate both of these kind of things in this at the same time, where once I know what I'm trying to do in my mind, then it's more of a technical exercise in how I can get that out onto the canvas. So one of the reasons for that also is that, after I still paint with ink and paper, but now that I use a lot more precious metal and complex techniques that cost a lot of money, you can't really fuck that stuff up because it costs you a lot of time and money to do so. So you have to, so many years kind of practicing my aesthetic techniques to get them where I wanted to be, and so that I could then spend my time executing them as more of a quality control exercise. It makes it sound a little bit too kind of engineering heavy, but I am a scientist after all, and I do kind of consider it to be that way. So the other thing, in terms of like state of mind, particularly with ink paintings, and particularly with any kind of painting which requires these, like Sumier is really at its heart, like the philosophy of it is that the mind is reflected onto the paper. You have you cultivate these calm states of mind. You grind your ink stick, for 20 minutes to focus your mind in meditation and achieve a state of calm, so that you can reflect that calmness and fluidity onto the paper. And I personally find that when I meditate before I paint, that my work is always better. So I think there's, but again, that ink painting is very different than the process by making a microetching, which we can get into a little bit later. It integrates some of those techniques, but is also very tech heavy. And so, yeah, I mean, in general, though, I think that the brain definitely does shift states, and you could use them to your advantage, or learn to not push things when your brain is not in the right state. That's also a good signal.
So you said one keyword that really stood out. So you meditate prior to creating.
Time, yeah, when I'm disciplined about it. It depends though, because there are some days when I feel like I'm pressed for time, or whatever, I got to get this done. Yeah, it becomes like a job like any other job. And you just realize that you can't really force stuff. That none of my best work is something that I've forced. It's always the ideas which come out organically. It doesn't necessarily happen in a moment of epiphany in meditation, although that does happen occasionally. Its function is really twofold. One is that you open your mind towards new ideas and being able to synthesize new ideas, and the other is that you are physically calming your body in order to, execute your physical movements when you're painting that much more fluidly.
Have you ever experienced working with another artist where they just utilize art just to process, traumas or any of that sort, or any other mental health issue?
Yeah, well, a couple things to say about that. So my wife is an experimental dance and movement artist. So I'm, pretty well connected into the kind of experimental performance art world. And you see a lot of that there. A lot of performers who are actively processing trauma, who are actively processing, emotional concepts through improvisation in particular, which is really, sometimes I make more improvisational pieces, but I tend to be more on the other side of the spectrum for the most part. So I've seen a lot more art than I've created, which is along those lines. So my wife is interested in emergent improvisation, for example. How ideas and emotions and kind of patterns of movement evolve through different people improvising all in the same space with some theme in mind or not. I find that work really interesting, and yet I think that when I've personally processed my own mental health struggles, I would say mostly, I have mood disorders run in my family. I've battled with severe depression my whole life, and when I've made pieces along those lines, they have been really, really challenging, I have to say. So I have a couple micro etchings I haven't even released. One on PTSD and the other one on called bipolar, which is probably the most well-defined mental health struggle that I identify with, and they took me freaking years to make
Oh, wow.
because
Did you
it's just
complete it?
yeah. I mean, I find the same thing with therapy also, is that it's just bringing up the difficulties that you have in your life. Oftentimes, just you're rehashing and retreading and bringing up to the surface that whereas at times I was expecting this catharsis, in working through them, with these pieces, really the exact opposite happened in a lot of cases where you're just kind of like wading through the mud again and taking stock of your struggles. So personally, for me, um, I haven't had a whole lot of success in processing my emotional difficulties, but I had been planning this series of pieces for years that was going to be about neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric conditions. And to try to make microetchings, which, the whole point of a microetching is that you can animate an image depending upon where you are. So the rainbow that you have, as you walk around, you can see the images, the neurons blinking on and off. You can use that to great effect in a lot of different avenues. And the really in depicting a lot of these conditions as spectra, for a lot of them, it's not just that you have it or you don't. For autism, for example, or schizophrenia, or Alzheimer's disease, there are gray areas in these. There's aspects of the anatomy which are changed. There's aspects of the human condition which are changed with them. So they're meant to be trying to find the balance between giving people an idea of what it is like to be a human who is suffering from these conditions, but also have their, I don't want to paint a person with a broken leg, if you get the
Mm.
sort of metaphor here. It's much more complex than that. There's a lot more kind of subtle emotional shading that's required in order to give people voice and kind of respect what they've been through. So in the end, honestly, I just found it too much, and I'm still waiting to one day kind of return to this and to complete this series. But the first two just took so much out of me that I just decided to give myself a break and kind of focus on other projects. Anyway, that was a very long-winded answer. Sorry about that.
No, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that and being, transparent with your experiences and your journey because it's for me. So I don't know how much you know about me and the table and gallery. For me, it's not just exhibiting the art, but telling the artist's story. I do feel that the artist's journey and their story is just as powerful as what's being exhibited because it's the transformational aspect that took place. And I am how do you say, the first person to experience what I'm preaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs that said art is not going to pay your bills. You need to stick to business. Went
Yeah.
to business school. The whole creativity was suppressed. So me painting and drawing, everything was laid to rest. And it came out in other ways. I became a rebel. I just didn't understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. So rebellious acts, which would mean that I had to create solutions to a lot of problems. Became an activist at a very young age because I wanted to save people. Plate is going to be my canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I merged it, and that's how I was able to put my body physically in a relaxed state. So I was not, in that fight or flight mode, questioning if someone's going to stab me. But, it was
Yeah.
just,
Uh,
it put me in that space because I'm looking at myself. I'm going to be opening the doors. I'm having an art show and I need to feed people. So I need to make the most of what I have. And as an entrepreneur, the meter is running. So I have to pay the rent. So I have to get this going. So it's just finding solutions to these problems. As I was processing all of this and opening the space, people ask me, okay, what is the table and gallery and why the table? The table, so prior to moving to New Haven, I was in Japan. And in Japan, they say that even objects have spirits and souls. So the table, when I had endured the loss, I would sit at this table and I would say, one day I'm going to fill you up with good memories and laughter and all of that good stuff. And little did I know I was on a budget and I needed a table for the restaurant. I
Uh-huh.
brought my table, and lo and behold, I saw my dream come true. I started seeing the table being utilized for birthdays and celebrations. And I was pinching myself because I'm like, wow, I'm actually having that dream come true. I just want to let you know, Greg, okay? Off the record, like December 20th, I know you don't know me, but today is a very monumental day for me. One day you'll know. But it's also a dream come true because during that time, not only did I go back to school, but I started studying the brain.
Wait,
And I would,
this is your time in Japan?
no,
This
this
is
was during the pandemic when I had the loss and everything.
uh-huh.
So I started studying the brain and I was like, you know, why do things happen the way it does? Why do you, lose loved ones to addiction? And it was something that I questioned so much. So I started listening to every neuroscientist. I started studying the brain, and I was just so amazed at how the brain transforms, what the brain looks like when, it's mentally unhealthy or if it's in the different phases of addiction. So I just started studying it and trying to make sense of what was happening, why, I was losing individuals in my family because of this mental health issue or addiction issues. And to be here and to talk with you, a neuroscientist and an artist, like you have no idea. This is like a dream come true, Greg. Like you have no idea because people are like, "What the heck are you doing?" No one could make sense of what I was trying to achieve and what I was trying to do. My healing and transformational journey led to the birth of the Table and Gallery. So this is a very unique business model. Healing is a huge component of what is happening here. So my culinary artists, the artists, everybody that I collaborate with, it becomes one big collaboration where I unite the food with the art. So now each time I'm exhibiting an artist, I would sit down and say, hey, what nourished your soul?
Mm.
What was the food that you grew up eating when you were in that creative process? And then I
Interesting.
also like to say, there's no starving artists at the table and gallery because this is where we come together at the table. So I've started, and I am also studying each creative I collaborate with, and I'm seeing that they're all utilizing each of these mediums to process their anxiety. And now I'm connecting with a lot of like-minded individuals that are also utilizing different variations of art, visual arts, music. I do host events with music. My first musician, believe it or not, was a musician slash neuroscientist.
Nice.
And he studies how music impacts the brain. And
That's really powerful
yeah,
stuff.
so now after meeting Martin, which is just also, that is like a miracle right
I mean,
there.
that guy is just like on fire all the time. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better person, like in terms of, like giving voice to the healing journey of art. I mean, he just could wax on for a decade if you allow it.
Well, the crazy thing is the two individuals that knew him came here randomly and gave me two roses like in a package.
Uh-huh.
And it was just random. Like these two individuals came in, they introduced themselves, and they said, "Here's a rose for you." And I said, "Okay, great." Fast forward, we just recently found out that Martin handed those roses to them that was given to me. And
Yeah, there's all kinds of just like weird magical things that happen around that guy. I gotta say, he's
a,
yeah,
yeah, a lot of synchronicity.
yeah. He invited me to. So I met him at the Society for Neuroscience meeting over a few years. You know, we've sort of developed our relationship, and he invited me to. I forget the word they used for it. It's like a gathering of the minds essentially that is kind of a tradition in Washington D.C. in particular. I mean, honestly, it sounds a lot of like what you're doing at Table and Gallery is inviting a lot of people, oftentimes artists and oftentimes from different disciplines, to just have like a think tank night, to just all bond and discuss and figure out, what kind of new ideas can come out of the mix. It's really sort of a lovely idea. I'm sure he gave you the demonstration of, this is hope and this is,
Yes, he
he
did. He gave me the demonstration, and you know what's bizarre? That the gold light didn't work
uh-huh.
at his place, and it turned on when I plugged it in here.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, it's just a regular white bulb. I mean, if it burns out, you should easily be able to replace it. The other thing I wanted to mention just quickly offhand is that I've made lighting kits for these, which have evolved past what Martin had. So the exhibit lamps you have right now were just ones that I had, to as for traveling exhibit. I now have ones where I use these RGB bulbs so that you can program the color of the lights however you want. So you can turn one on and off. Basically, one of the most important things I think to talk about microetchings is that they are color is an infinite variable on them. If you're talking like they can literally appear any color that you want depending upon what color you put on them. If you block out the color from three of the lights, it's going to only illuminate in that color. Put two on, you move them further apart, the image changes. There's like a massive amount of flexibility in how they can be displayed. So anyway, the new lighting kit is capable of that. I think we probably don't have time to set that up. And
No, but if you could please email me what you just told me about the lighting, because lighting is a big deal here.